Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode here on the Best Damn Movie Show channel, where we have been discussing a bunch of classic films, specifically the 52 essential films that are collected here in this book put out by Turner Classic Movies with a foreword by the late great Robert Osborne, who was the longtime host for all of the Turner Classic Movie segments. He was one of the real just proponents of classic film love and classic film knowledge, and we here are honoring him. I'm here with my friend Dan. This is his channel. So, Dan, please introduce yourself to everyone.
I am Dan Skipbound. Obviously, you know if I'm the host of the Top 5 Weekly, and Andrew's on there a lot. So, and this is a series that I kind of talk to these guys about doing because I love Robert Osborne. I love classic movies, and I thought, well, this is a context that we could work on and work through. And so we decided to do these 52 videos.
Yes, and my name is Andrew. I am from the Cabzilla production channel, and yet again, I've been collaborating with my buddy Dan here, as well as my buddy Stephen Billings from the Film Club Central channel, which you probably have seen in several episodes, as well as our mutual friend Mark Tordai from Acceleration Productions, his own channel. And in this episode, we're going to be discussing really a seminal classic of both literature and film, and that is 1962's To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a fantastic classic film that I am so glad we are discussing. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I even brought my own copy of To Kill a Mockingbird here because it's one of my favorite novels, and I am really glad that Dan is letting me talk about it. But this film stars one of the greatest actors of all time, considered by many, Gregory Peck. And this film if you are not familiar with it, if you're not familiar with this series of videos, we will be spoiling all of the plot. So if you haven't seen the film, please see the film and then come back and watch this. But if you don't care about plot spoilers, then just continue on watching. But this film is set in 1930s small town Alabama, and it takes place all from the perspective of this young girl named Scout Finch, and her father is Atticus Finch, her brother is Jem Finch, and her best friend is Dill. And this film deals with kind of a lot of children type things and children perspectives. Um, uh, this film um, this film also deals with kind of the stranger next door in this character of Boo Radley, who these children are fascinated with. And it also deals with a court case, a very important court case in this small town. It is a court case about an African American man named Tom Robinson who has allegedly raped a white woman in Mayella Yule. And this film really delves into a lot of the themes around that. But I'm going to hand it over now to my friend Dan to really give us a sense of his perspective of this film. And Dan, when was the first time that you saw this film?
Oh, I saw this film very young age. I like you. This is a book that is ingrained in your in you as a child through school. I have, you're familiar with the area that I grew up in because you're from the Northeast, and I was from the Northeast, and so we had a station. I had a station that had absolute classic movies every Saturday, and I would just grow up watching these classic movies. And then I get to watch the Red Sox and the Bruins and the Celtics later on in the evening. Then we get to watch some of our favorite sitcoms that were replayed during the week and so forth and whatnot. But so I saw this movie at a very, very young age, quite a long time ago. But I love it so much. I've read the book multiple times. I cannot help but relate to this film. And of course, the film has basically been redone in different forms. John Grisham, A Time to Kill. It's basically To Kill a Mockingbird. You've seen something like this multiple different times because it's such great material by Harper Lee. The book is by Harper Lee,
Yes.
and I mean, very rarely do you have a book translate to the screen as well as this. And I'll tell you what, the Gregory Peck, I mean, the guy won the Oscar, but he deserved it. He was phenomenal in this film, and he had to play with children, and he had to play off of a bunch of different kinds of characters, and he makes it work. You know, and these children, Mary Baden plays Scout, and Philip Alford plays Jim. They were besides Atticus Finch, they were kind of the main two characters of the movie, Jem and Scout. And we basically are going through this movie through the eyes of these children and the narration of an adult Scout. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the fun part about the film as well.
It's almost as if the entire film is a flashback for the adult Scout. It starts off in the summer months, right before school is about to start in the fall, and these children are essentially playing, and and right away we're introduced to Scout and Jem and their father Atticus. And what is interesting in the film is that they call him Atticus. They don't call him dad. They don't call him father. They don't call him anything like that. They call him Atticus, which is a very interesting thing. And right away in the film, we see that the Atticus is an older father. He is not someone who is a typically young, agile father. And right away, we open with kind of a conflict between father and son, Jem and Atticus, because Jem wants his father to be like the other fathers, to specifically in the sense to play football with all the other fathers, the way they play. And Atticus is too old for this. He's an older father, probably in his 40s. We could probably guess perhaps older. I mean, it's very interesting how throughout this entire film, we see instances where um, Atticus is a different type of guy. He's a different type of father. He's a different type of person. And it's really interesting that in this small town, there is such a unique figure in Atticus Finch. Um, and but that really has, but they don't really touch upon that too much. It's only really from the perspective of children, like we've said, and also from the perspective of children, we get to see how they view adults, specifically the character of Boo Radley, who is spoken of throughout this film, specifically in the early moments of this film. You hear that they have this kind of idea about Boo Radley, that he's kind of this monstrous shut-in, or this man you don't go near their house because it's like it's a kind of a rundown type of place. It kind of leads to this myth about Boo Radley, that he was, maybe he's not fully human. Maybe he's this bad guy who stabbed his father one time or something like that. It's really interesting how children think up these fantasies of the adult world, and they just kind of make up their own games around this. We see early on here they're playing a game where you sit in a tire and you roll. I mean, this is long before the days of television and video games and anything like that. Kids basically had to play with what they had, and what is it? And the biggest thing in the time was kids daring each other to do things, and Jem is basically dared into touching the Boo Radley house because that's considered to be such a scary place. It is a very interesting film from that perspective. Dan, what do you think of the Boo Radley character? Someone who we only see once in this movie.
Well,
Um,
well, the thing is, I just I remember when you watch the classic films, you think back, and I'm thinking forward, not thinking back. Well, we've seen this before. It was done in The Sandlot, and we've seen it in this movie, or whatever. And it's like, and you love going back to see these classic films once again and revisiting these films, because then you see the inspiration from other films and other mediums and so forth for these classic films. And the Boo Radley character, we'll get into a little bit later, the actor that plays Boo Radley. I'm
Yes.
not going to talk about that person right now because I'm not going to spoil it for Andrew. I'm going to let him have the honor of.
Yeah, I was holding that off for later on, of course. But I mean, for those of you at home, I'm hoping you've seen this movie because we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna spoil it. But we'll talk about the actor right now while we're on the topic of Boo Radley. He appears only once in this film. He appears in the end in a heroic fashion, as as he saves Jem from being attacked by Mr. Yule, who is really just a despicable character, but we can touch on him later. But yes, this the character Boo Radley is played by none other than Robert Duvall, someone who at the time, I think this was maybe his first credited role in a film. This was long before he was in The Godfather or had his moment in Apocalypse Now or any other film that you associate him with. But yeah, and he is the big hero of this movie, and he has no lines. He has no lines at all. I mean, one of my favorite and maybe my favorite moment of this film is the reveal of Boo Radley at the end. The way it is staged in such a way that it's really kind of unique. Is that he is at the end of this film after Jem has been rescued. You're in the bedroom. Hectatus come along, and Scout has to say what happened, the attack and everything. And Boo Radley is in the corner behind the door, just in the shadows. And it really says that this is a character who's lived in the shadows his entire life. And we're not quite sure why. I think, Dan, you probably have your assumption on the character of Boo Radley. I kind of always assumed that he was someone with a mental handicap or someone with a mental health problem, whether it's some whatever it may be. But I also felt like he lived at a time where people really didn't know how to deal with that. You know
No,
what I mean? So basically, what his parents decided to do was uh, just shackle him away, just keep him hidden from the world. And in the moment that he steps into the light, he is this hero. He is revealed just to be a normal man. He's not some monstrous man. He's a very gentle human being, and it's such a unique movie moment. It's a movie magic moment for me. But moving off of Boo Radley, we have kind of the other storyline in this film, and kind of I would say the main storyline this film really focuses on is the trial of Tom Robinson, and this is a film and a book and a story that really touches on ingrained cultural racism in the deep, deep South that Atticus and Jem and Scout live in, and how these old kind of ideas about racism still really exist. Dan, did you notice that, like, when you were watching it when you were younger, or is this something that you kind of learned over time? Because I read the book before I saw the movie. I read the book several years before I saw the movie, and that was really apparent in the book right from the beginning that this was almost a holdover time from the era of the Civil War.
no, I did not read the book until I was about 12, 11, 12 years old in middle school, then read it again in high school, and then read it again in college. And then, when I got out of college, I read it again. I've read the book about 4 or 5 times. I saw the movie first, but seeing the movie, I still knew what was going on because of the era that the film was set in. You knew what was going on. You knew the racism and what, like I said, and I brought up A Time to Kill, is a John Grisham book that I read. Oh God, I went through that like on fire. I read that book so fast, and then it was like one of those moments. Oh, thank God they're making this into a movie, and of course it's phenomenal. Another great book to movie adaptation that's, I mean, just flawless, and that's why they remind me so much of each other, To Kill a Mockingbird and A Time to Kill. But the murder, of course, you're living in a time also where things like incest and stuff like that take place in the South because there just weren't a lot of women around, and so sometimes fathers mess with their daughters and brothers mess with their sisters and
Yeah,
cousins mess with their cousins, and
yeah. I mean,
a little bit of that kind of stuff going on.
I mean, yeah, we joke about it today in modern times, but this was something that was very much a reality for a lot of areas in the country, specifically area that this book is discussing, and an era that this movie and book is discussing. Yeah, it and the film makes the racism very obvious right away from the moment we meet the Mr. Yule character. You can tell this is not a good guy. We meet him. Jem, Scout, and Dill decide to go to the courthouse because they want to see where allegedly Boo Radley was shackled up in, like, the basement or the prison or whatever. And their father's in there, essentially what I assume to be the arraignment of Tom Robinson. And afterwards you see the kids go away, and Mr. Yule comes out and basically says, I'm sorry that you have to represent this guy, but we all know that he's guilty and whatnot. And Atticus Finch is not having any of this. Atticus Finch is an upright man. This is as close to a kind of real life hero as you're gonna find in a film anywhere. I remember years ago watching some program where they did a countdown of like the greatest movie heroes, and Atticus Finch was number one, and he's always kind of up there on the list for all these types of for all the heroes list in movies, because he stood up and defended against racism, against injustice in a place that people don't stand up for injustice or racism in. Dan, I'm pretty sure you remember this. There's a scene after the trial that I want to mention before we discuss that great monologue he has in the trial, where all the African American people have to sit up in the balconies, and they all stand up and kind of honor him as he's walking out as their hero, because no one would stand up, well, no one would help them in this situation. It's a really powerful moment.
Absolutely powerful moment. I mean, for him, the judge knew when the judge came to him on his balcony. I mean, not on his balcony, on his porch. He says, "Hey, I got this Tom Robinson thing. Did you hear about this?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'll defend him." And he's not really doing that kind of law. He's kind of doing like wills and stuff like that. Stuff with people's property, that kind of law. But the judge knew he went to the right guy for the job.
And I think the judge knows that no one else would take this case.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially a case which, by just the optics, by just hearing what the allegations are, is an open and shut case in many people's opinions, specifically the way the people think.
And we've on my other show, we've talked about courtroom dramas, and this is considered one of the greatest courtroom dramas of all time because of how he gets to each point he's trying to make, Atticus Finch, in this courtroom, with each witness, even including his own witness, finding out that he can't move his left arm. So how can he do something with his left arm and only do it with his right arm? How could he choke somebody, or how could he do this, and then the motivations of some of the witnesses, the Yule and the
their testimonies were like so easily able to poke through that you're watching it now and you're like, wow, I can't believe that no one else is seeing how obvious the situation is. The whole thing is that Mayella Yule's injuries were all on the right side of her face. Like she had a black eye on her right eye, and she had bruises up and down the right side of her body. And the only person who would probably do something like that is someone who's left-handed. And come to find out, her father is left-handed. Atticus has a way of pointing that out by having him write his name, and it's obvious that the father is the one who probably beat and raped her, probably on more than one occasion. But this time, they have someone they can pin it on. Tom Robinson, the innocent Tom Robinson, um, who is very much the picture of innocence in this film. I mean, he is someone who has who's just a hardworking man trying to provide for his family. He has a large family that we see in this film that he has to provide for, or at least help provide for. We're not sure what the situation is, but this is someone, like Dan said, who has a maimed left arm because he got caught in a cotton gin when he was a kid. And I don't know if you've ever seen a cotton gin, but you get your hand caught in that must have hurt. I'm saying it must have hurt really, really badly. And this is probably someone who's been working on a plantation or doing physical labor his entire life. Probably not an easy life and probably not unique to his situation. And you're watching this trial, and the most pivotal moment, and the moment that you've probably seen in so many movie moment highlights of all time, is Atticus's monologue, which is just incredible. The way it's staged, I believe it's staged almost all in one take. I have to check up on that, but it's such a powerful moment of basically telling people, you know, put away your preconceived notions of racial hatred and do what is right, do what is just, do what is essentially obvious. And basically has that final line, do your duty. Basically do your duty as a human being to see what is right. And it's just a extremely powerful scene.
But even in the South, you still cannot get this group of middle-aged white men to change and do something different and think, use their brains and think, even though it took them a while. I think it took over 2 hours or something like that, or somebody out somewhere in there. And to scout, that's a long time. That bodes well. They still could not change the way they thought. And they unanimously said that Tom Robinson was guilty.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And the thing is, God, we knew something was going to happen to Tom Robinson. We knew that we weren't going to just get to the end of the film and Tom Robinson was just going to go to jail. You knew somehow, some way, something was going to happen. And this in a prison transfer. I mean, from the jail prison to the actual prison where he was going, he escapes, and he gets shot. Go figure who shoots him. Yule. How does Yule end up?
Well, I think the deputy ended up shooting him.
Oh, I thought.
But still, no, it was it was one of the deputies that shot him.
Oh.
But I think you can assume that they didn't do very much to kind of reapprehend him. I mean, I think there's certain assumptions you can make about the whole situation. Also, I don't doubt that Tom Robinson won. I mean, he was just convicted of raping a white woman in the Deep South. I mean, yes, the trial was going to go to appeal, or at least they were going to file for an appeal. But who knows what would have happened there? But in his mind, you could tell towards the end when he's being escorted out, that he's extremely downtrodden. Atticus, I think, basically tries to say, we're going to file an appeal. I'm going to file an appeal tomorrow. Don't worry about it. We knew this was going to happen. But he just walks right out. You know what I mean? So he's kind of, given up in the sense. And I think Atticus hasn't given up. I think he kind of thought there was a good chance of an appeal. I think he thought that perhaps in a different court and different circumstances, because in a court in that town, there was no way Tom Robinson was going to get off. It was kind of just a moral victory that Atticus was able to get the jury to deliberate for more than, a couple of minutes. You know, the 2 hours, I guess, was the moral victory of the situation. And I think people knew that. I think the African American community in that balcony knew that that was a big leap forward in terms of progressive justice in that town. Um, and and it's really kind of tragic that that happened to the Tom Robinson character, because I think the actor portrayed by the actor Brock Peters, who portrayed Tom Robinson, did a phenomenal job in the film when he was put on the witness stand. Very emotional, very honest, and very, very good in the film. I mean, the film, like Dan had mentioned, really only has one major star in Gregory Peck, but you have people around in certain roles that are very, very good. The actor who plays I'm trying to fill in. Yeah, the actor who plays Bob Ewell is fantastic. James Anderson. I hated the man the first time I saw him, and he pops up every now in the film in what we can assume is a drunken stupor, just saying the most awful things. You know, using profanity, well, the N word, of course, which is used several times in this film. And for a film in 1962 to really take on racism, because yet again this was at the time of the civil rights movement and things like that, and this was a book that came out right around the same time too. This was one of those kind of few moments where a book came out and then a movie was made almost right afterward. You know what I mean? Usually there's like a gap of a few years or sometimes decades for an adaptation to be made, but this one came out right away. This was the only book that Harper Lee ever written. Technically, it was a book that came out a few years ago, but that's a different story for a different thing. That's for the book series that Dan and I are gonna do someday. But this I just want to mention a few things. The character of Dill is based on the famous author Truman Capote, who was a childhood friend of Harper Lee, and the book, I believe, is kind of quasi based on Harper Lee's life. Like, she is essentially the scout character, um, and as Dan mentioned before, Gregory Peck won an Oscar for this film, a much well-deserved Oscar. But this film also won best adapted screenplay. It also won best art direction. It was nominated for best picture that year, but that was the year of Lawrence Arabia, which is yet again another all-time great film that we will probably cover sometime here on this series of videos that we are doing. But yes, that has been To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, we could talk about this book slash movie slash just all-time great, essentially why it is on the 52 essential films and why they matter. We could talk about this for much longer, but Dan, where can people find you? They'll probably know they can find you here on your channel, but where else can they find you?
Yeah, well, we do a podcast called The Best Damn Movie Show with my co-host Vinny Laspada, and obviously on another show on this channel called The Top 5 Weekly, where I discuss a topic or an actor or a director with my co-hosts, and a lot of times it's Andrew and Stephen Billings. We do a lot of work together, and that's usually on a Saturday night. And my name, Dan Skip Allen, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, or at From the Fourth Row.
You can find me on my Facebook page, Cabzilla Productions. You can also find me on Twitter at Cabzilla06. I just want to say one more little thing that is kind of very interesting, almost trivial type thing. If you're ever on Jeopardy one day, you gotta ask this. You learned it here. The film was produced by Alan J. Pakula, who was the director of the film All the President's Men. So that's a very interesting kind of connection in terms of films that are essentially social commentaries about very big themes at the time. He had his hand in both this film and that film. Really an interesting kind of correlation there. I thought I would just add that in just in case you ever need that knowledge one day. But this has been a wonderful time. I'd like to thank Dan once again for doing this series. I would like to, of course, thank the late great Robert Osborne and of course Turner Classic Movies for all the great things that they have done for classic film fans and classic film knowledge. So until next time, goodbye.